You're listening to Reach, Teach, Talk with Nat Dane.
Welcome back to another episode of Reach, Teach, Talk. There's something to be said for serendipity. I was going through Ed Week last week, and I found this opinion piece that really turned my head. And it was an article, it was an opinion that was written by this woman, Brittany Collins, who is speaking about the importance of keeping the SEL central, primary, while we're making this move to remote teaching and learning, and how not just it's important for us to do it, but it's possible, and it's also really awesome when it works well, and it's possible to make it work well. And for those of us, those many of us who are looking at this remote learning platform and teaching platform as kind of cold or technology based, or I'm missing something here. Yes, I mean there is parts that I think are missing in terms of the move to remote teaching and learning, but there's also perhaps some advantages in some aspects of the remote platform that can actually help us as we include SEL in the remote learning classroom, as we think about our students and work on helping them as they're navigating this new world during the pandemic that brings about its own questions, its own anxieties, its own real exposing the importance of being together, of bonding, of being a connected community, and whether it's the classroom community, the school to family community, the one-on-one community, it's all coming to the forefront here. And in Brittany's article, her opinion piece last week, and again, this is an education week, it's available online, Ed Week. Yes, you really can do trauma-informed teaching remotely. You really can, you really should. I reached out to Brittany Collins out in Western Massachusetts, and I was able to connect with her, and she was willing to come on as a guest for Reach, Teach, Talk to give all of us some helpful advice and some helpful tips, and also just overall encouragement about our efforts to connect with our students in this remote teaching and learning platform. So without further ado, Brittany Collins, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Nat. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about the work that you're doing and the opportunity to advance trauma-informed and SEL pedagogies online. As you mentioned, I'm the Teaching and Learning Coordinator at Write the World, which is an organization that supports online writing for teens ages 13 through 19 around the world. We have about 50,000 members in over 110 countries. We started out of Harvard University's Advanced Leadership Initiative about 5 years ago. And we support extracurricular programming as well as teachers who are looking to support writing across the curriculum using digital technologies. And so these themes of writing and storytelling and SEL are what I'm dealing with every day, but they feel like they have heightened importance in this time of the pandemic. So I'm excited to talk about that with you.
I'm very curious about this focus on writing and its importance when you're creating a stronger SEL-driven classroom, remote or not.
Yeah, so when we're thinking about trauma or adversity or emotional development overall, even not in a trauma context, the process of putting our lived experiences and our thoughts and feelings into a narrative arc has been proven psychologically to be incredibly advantageous from an intellectual and an emotional standpoint. And of course, stories overall are fun and enjoyable to read, and they give meaning to both writer and reader. But the process itself of, even if it's not public, just privately having students put down their thoughts and feelings in reaction to a text or their lived experience in this time is something that really promotes learning and promotes emotional well-being for everybody involved. There's a number of researchers that have been studying teaching as storytelling. So Kieran Egan is someone who comes to mind as a leading educational theorist that has a book called Teaching as Storytelling, and focuses on this idea that all learning happens through narratives, that we're storytelling animals, and that humans are unique because we are the species that can tell stories to process our experiences and integrate them and move forward and learn from them. And there are also studies from Paul Zak and others focusing on the ways in which stories foster empathy neurologically. So the brain produces something called oxytocin when we read or listen to a story. And oxytocin is the neurochemical that creates connection. And so stories then become catalysts for empathy, and then that empathy catalyzes action. So sharing stories really is, I think it can feel like soft skills, but really it's stories that drive change in lives and in communities at scale.
It's stories, as you mentioned, it's stories that historically have brought people together, communities, tribes, nations. These sharing myths and right and stories that
Absolutely.
right that teach lessons of how to live.
COVID-19 is manifesting differently for all of us, depending on our geography and our family and the context that we find ourselves in. But we're all connected in some way through this crisis. And so I think that's powerful in terms of a teaching opportunity, because we can model for young people how we respond to crisis. And that's no small task, right? I mean, we as adults, especially in Western society, are not very good at talking about challenging topics and emotions, and loss and grief and the realities that are manifesting in these in every moment of every day right now. And to do so in the moment is even harder than it is to do so reflectively. If we're teaching about a crisis in history, if we're talking about something that happened a year ago, we have some distance. But to be able to come in to an educative moment from a place of authenticity and rawness, and be able to say that I'm impacted by this and that's okay. And, you know, we all are impacted by this and we can get through this together. The only way that we're going to teach young people to be, you know, candid and open about having and processing emotions and learning through those and using them as catalysts for learning is by being, you know, I'm going to use the word with calibrated vulnerability. I'm not saying that teachers should come in and unleash all of their emotions on their students or depend or burden their students in any way with these emotions. However, being honest, naming emotion, words, and just opening conversations through their vulnerability makes it okay for students to be vulnerable as well in this time.
It makes it okay, and
Yeah.
it's okay, not necessarily
Yes.
it's gonna be okay, which is a message that we do also want to communicate,
Sure.
but not in a contrived way, right?
Sure.
But it's okay. What you're feeling is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, many times, right? Like I'm thinking about younger students, especially who might not have the vocabulary to
Absolutely.
identify what they're feeling.
Right.
What would we do with those with students who are younger? Does the writing process help them to kind of circle into, this is what I'm feeling, and is that helpful?
You know, I think that it does. I think that writing at any age is helpful. Of course, with younger students, you have to be much more careful about how you're framing it. With teenagers, you can, you know, frame a direct writing assignment about the COVID-19 pandemic in a way that, you know, has a lens of unity or solidarity or resilience, so that you're supporting positive emotions through reflection. With younger students, of course, you have to be much more scaffolded if you're going to open conversations. I think that with younger students, they might be experiencing emotions that they don't have the developmental ability to name or recognize, that might manifest in behavioral challenges, anger, sadness, outbursts, that they of course don't know why they're feeling and acting in these ways, but they can sense and pick up on the emotions that the adults around them have, even if they're 4 or 5 years old. I have a friend who has a toddler who's not even in preschool yet and doesn't obviously understand what this all means, but knows that she can't see her friends anymore and knows that, you know, she's not going to daycare. And I think it's different for every family how they choose to word, you know, the narratives that they are telling their children about this time. But I think across the board, it's important that we make space for making those emotions and outbursts okay, right? If little kids are coming to us and they're acting in this way, we can talk them through their emotions and ask them, you know, what's going on for them, but in a way that's calibrated, of course, developmentally.
I'm thinking about your opinion piece from last week. You made some very, very, I think, excellent strategic points for teachers on how to maintain and even capitalize on this period of time in their classrooms.
But creating in your online learning environment a sense of safety and connection and promoting students' emotional regulation, whether that's through naming emotions and practicing by modeling how to experience and process emotion, or whether it's through mindfulness activities that promote, breathing, relaxing, taking time out of content-based curricula to practice these kinds of self-care tools, and equip students with small exercises that they can then do on their own. All of these kinds of steps create a trauma-informed learning environment. I think that remote learning brings to mind a lot of isolating images. Obviously, we're doing synchronous and asynchronous pedagogies. We're not in a classroom together with students. However, I would push back against that to say that the connection is different, but we can be connected and even more connected in our online learning environments. And that those senses of connection is really what buoys young people in times of adversity. I would also say that establishing a sense of routine is something that's incredibly important and relatively tactile and accessible for educators in terms of applying this trauma-informed lens. We know that young people and everyone, adults included, when they're experiencing stress, they're feeling like everything is out of control. So it's anything that reintegrates a sense of control that can help combat stress and trauma. So something as simple as knowing, okay, every day at 3 p.m. is when I log on and I do my reading assignments with my reading group. And maybe I'm on a message board or maybe I'm Skyping, but this is the time of day and the day each week that I'm doing that activity. Every Friday, I'm going to check in with my teacher in the morning and we're going to have a conversation. And maybe it's about content knowledge, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just a check-in about where we're at right now and how we're feeling. Knowing what to expect, even though it seems small in the scope of all of these larger questions about education, really helps to imbue the online learning experience with a sense of control and expectation and structure that might be kind of subconscious. Students might not sit there and think, gee, I'm really glad I know what's coming up tomorrow, but it's something that maintains this feeling of knowing what to expect, which if you think about the school day when we're in school and react and interacting synchronously with our teachers, we know how the day is going to go. We have the blocks from 8:30 to 3 p.m. Everything is very structured and rigid. So, translating that as much as we can online, I think is helpful for a sense of continuity and control.
For sure. I love that. I love the idea of stability, and that comes with routine, that comes with repetition. And also that comes with, I'm still here, right. I'm still here. Like, you're going to see me every day, 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatnot. And even if it's an asynchronous kind of format where as a, primary elementary school teacher, you're filming yourself reading a story or something. And the kids know that every day at 10 o'clock in the morning, they hear, or an assembly, every day we're going to have our assembly and we can all check in from wherever we are.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, all of that being so important. And I'm thinking about stories now too, because in a sense, I'm thinking about the way we start the day during this period of time matters, and how stories can factor in. Perhaps, how are you today? Where are you today? Where
Absolutely.
Are you here and here and here? Right.
And even show and tell. Think about something small like show and tell in schools. Like, that is a form of storytelling, that you're bringing a piece of your identity into class and talking about the story behind it. That's something that can absolutely translate to remote learning context, and that allows for storytelling at every age. I saw a school around here has been doing something through social media where they had show us your socks day. And so it's nothing weighty, like it's some levity in this time, but all the little kids were taking pictures of, their sock with monkeys on it and their sock with bananas on it. And like, that's a way of fostering these feelings of connection and humor, and in a time when we all need that. And it's something that keeps the kids private. Like that was also a good part of it, is it's a photo that we can share in community in a way that's relatively anonymous. It doesn't put a lot of pressure on families,
Yes.
to contribute. Mm-hmm.
With so many school districts putting the focus off of grades, actually declaring no further no new content, no new curriculum, because as you pointed out rightfully, there's an equity issue here. Not everybody's
Absolutely.
going to have access, right, to a hotspot
Absolutely.
or to even the technology. So
Right.
districts are being conservative, I think rightfully, and saying
Yeah.
we can't move forward when not everybody can come forward with us. So,
Absolutely.
so all that to say, perhaps we're in a period also where we can focus on everything you and I are talking about, the SEL component, the stability equals security component, the
Yeah.
writing and creativity and expression, and being human, and the comfort and not knowing part. Um,
Mm-hmm.
does that make sense? And is
Absolutely. And I would argue that those are the skills that matter most, sending young people out into an uncertain world and preparing them for success. We need these emotional skills as much as we need content based knowledge. And it is critical at this time. There's an article in Inside Higher Ed by Deborah Cohen called "What Do We Need to Teach Now?" And it's all about this idea of, what message am I sending if I'm, pushing content knowledge and not being honest about how this is impacting me, and expecting my kids to just push forward and take quizzes and tests. And there's a missed opportunity for us all to connect as equals and as human beings that are all united by this challenging time.
but it sounds like you'd advocate actually to try to relinquish a little bit of control. If we're really hitting on the imperfection, don't make perfection be the enemy of the good. Um,
Yeah.
be authentic, be true, but also by being true and authentic, expressing in a way that we're all uncertain during this time. But I can offer you this.
Absolutely. I can offer you presence. I think that's huge. I can be there for you. And, along with that, it's so important for teachers to also protect their own emotional well being in this time. However, yes, how do you show up for students? And how can we learn together in community, but maybe it's learning in a way that looks different than the classroom? Maybe we're not logging on to talk in a circle every day about how we're feeling. Like, life also needs to move on. We still need to be productive even in times of challenge. And challenge, I think, can be a generative force for intellectual growth and engagement, and storytelling. Absolutely. We might find new ways of investing in curricular content through a lens that we didn't consider prior to this time. So it's not to say that real, true, authentic academic engagement can't or shouldn't happen. But how do we find symmetry between a depth of intellectual engagement and emotional engagement? And how do we do that in a way that, as you said, is releasing control to some extent? How can healing happen through a release of control? I think that there's absolutely this unconscious impulse in all of us to control what we can through work, through life. Like, what are the small details here that we have control over? And so it's natural for teachers to feel stressed about making their online learning environment the best that it can be. But being the best that it can be is often not through those control mechanisms, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. And I really appreciate also your reminding me and the audience here that when we're talking about focusing on social emotional learning, right? And when we're talking about, restoring a sense of emotional balance and stability, when we're talking about trauma-informed teaching, we're not throwing out the challenge that comes with learning. Oftentimes, I find myself talking with teachers about how learning is never passive. Actually, if you're truly, moving toward long-term attention, that comes through challenge, that comes through obstacles, and surmounting them. Right. So,
Absolutely.
right. So it's not like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. No curriculum. Let's just tell stories for colorful
Sure.
texturizing story taste.
Right.
But really, there's an importance to the cognitive work that we're doing together as well.
Yes, and from a trauma standpoint, studies show that that's also necessary in the way that routine is for young people who in times of crisis, that they need to know and they need to sense from mentors and teachers that even in challenging times, life does go on. And so I think that thinking about how learning is a mechanism for life going on, and for integrating and processing our experiences and using them, right? Like being productive in this time can feel more meaningful than ever. And so absolutely, again, finding that balance between emotional support and intellectual engagement.
Emotional support, intellectual engagement through storytelling, stability, sensitivity, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
and this discussion today has just been so eye-opening for me about the power we have as teachers, even when we're not sharing space together,
Mm-hmm.
and the power, and I don't mean control, I don't mean like power, like superpower. I mean,
Sure.
just we are that, we are those adults that these kids, that our students are looking toward for so much.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we can wrap up our conversation with some discussion about social emotional teaching. Maybe you might have a couple of bullet points that teachers can consider to help their own selves
Absolutely.
as you're giving so much at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably the most important element of social emotional learning pedagogy. When we talk about this kind of teaching, we are not saying that teachers should become school counselors or that they, have the same skill set or should have the same responsibility. That the onus of supporting real, psychological challenges that manifest in this time, that isn't something that should be on teachers' shoulders. But moving from a lens of fixing to supporting, I think is a viewpoint that can help teachers feel like they don't have to bear the burden of being sole witness to students' adversity and challenges in this time. It's a little bit cliched, this whole, fill your cup first kind of message, but it's so true that if we're not taking care of our own emotional regulation, and we're all stressed in this time, if we're not processing and dealing with that on our own in a way that is beneficial and regulatory to us, then there's no way that we can help promote that in students. And it's really easy, you mentioned like the equity issues that are manifesting right now. And I was just reading an article about the students who just haven't shown up to any online learning classes, and any attempt for teachers to reach out to families has gone unsuccessful. And that's so stressful, in the backdrop of a pandemic that's already stressful.
Stressful on the stressful on the teacher, right? Because that teacher
Yeah.
is feeling concerned and worried about
Right.
those individual students, that they've gone AWOL. And
Right.
where are they? Yeah.
Right. And these people as individuals, you've built relationships with them throughout the year, and that only intensifies that kind of stress. And there is a term, secondary traumatic stress, sometimes referred to as compassion fatigue, that can happen in individuals who are routinely exposed to others' traumas. Therapists, teachers are absolutely in that category. When you're receiving challenging stories, and you can't do anything to change the source of stress, the circumstances that are causing young people pain, that's something that can become very disturbing for oneself. And so it's crucial to realize, again, that you are one part of a constellation of support, that it's not, the onus is not on your shoulders as teacher to, quote unquote, take students home with you. I use that like proverbially, but you cannot fix everybody's problems. Instead, how can you support the social emotional wellness of all young people, coming to learn in your space, in your community, in a way that maintains those healthy boundaries, but also, catalyzes social emotional growth for them. It's a delicate balance. It's easy to sit here and talk about. It's hard to do in practice, but definitely maintaining your own sense of routine. What are regulatory practices for you? Do you meditate? Do you run? Like, what outside of work can you do, and who can you talk to to get a sense of relief and release for yourself. And then how can you also model those kinds of regulatory practices for students, and just, bring into conversation, these ideas of how we take care of ourselves emotionally and socially.
It's even the idea of asking your students, do you who do you count on? Who do you have somebody, a friend, or who you can go
absolutely
to?
And making connections, facilitating peer-to-peer connections, facilitating connections between colleagues and students, of course, counselors and therapists where appropriate, and students. Just being the facilitator for that kind of constellation is what the image that I come back to is huge, and it takes the onus off of your being the one person bearing witness to this hard time.
I found myself over the past couple of weeks acknowledging that, I've always, and this is not a new idea, but the idea that teaching is actually, ironically, is a very isolating profession. And our classrooms are oftentimes silos. And, those great eureka moments where like, oh my gosh, I had the kids just up to level 11.
Yeah.
But only I know this, or
right.
I and my students know this, but I wish that there was some other adult who saw this. I'm in my silo, and it's almost like that in a sense is compounded at this time, because not only do teachers generally feel this way, like this is my world here, my classroom, but now I'm remote. And that's what I wanted to get back to, is this idea of the term remote learning and remote teaching as compounding this feeling of isolation. And you've just offered some wonderful ways for teachers to try to face that and work with that. But as some final words, is there anything that you would like to share about just finally what teachers can do to not feel alone and siloed and remote from?
I think that finding ways to still connect with professional communities, whatever that looks like for them, whether it's colleagues, maybe it's friends, maybe it's an online, professional development community. Maintaining that sort of connection, again, this idea that we keep coming back to, is just as important for educators as it is for students. And that means connecting with other educators, not only with your students. And, having discussionisms about practice and pedagogy in this time to compare notes. And that could easily become like a perfectionistic competition, and that's not what I mean. But how do we process our own emotions and feedback that we're getting and challenges that we're having with our colleagues?
Very good. As I've always said, when I was a teacher, I've always joked about how I've got my friends and I've got my teacher friends.
Yeah,
and
the conversations are different.
Right? They're totally different conversations. And I'm investing 90% of my time right now with my teacher friends for all the reasons cited, and all the resources and help that they can give me during this time. And and then obviously connecting with my friends in ways that only they who know me so well can help me with.
Absolutely.
Brittany Collins, this has been a wonderful conversation, and hope.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Reach Teach Talk with Nat Damon. If you'd like to recommend a guest for a future episode, you can send your suggestion or questions to nat@reachacademics.com.